The importance of the astral light to Levi's teachings is that it allows a psychological interpretation of magic to explain some of the things that magic is traditionally held to be able to do. According to the traditions of folklore and the manuals of magic alike, a magical blessing or curse can affect a person who does not know that the powers of magic have been invoked for his help or damnation. A purely psychological account that accepts modern notions about the absolute dependence of mind on matter and conceives of thought as a mere side effect of certain lumps of meat called human brains cannot explain this sort of action at a distance. The existence of a medium that allows influences to pass from one mind to another takes care of this difficulty. It also solves several other crucial questions raised by any attempt to take traditional magical law seriously in the modern world. The predictive power of astrology, for example, can readily be explained by a subtle medium that is influenced in complex ways by the angles the sun, moon, and planets make with one another in relation to an observer, while other forms of divination can be understood as different modes of sensing the flow of influences through the astral light. Levi argues that every thought, word, and action shapes the astral light to some extent. Under most conditions, though, these effects are short-lived and have little impact, because they are poorly formulated and sent out into the astral light with very little momentum. The more clearly we formulate an intention, and the more forcefully we back it up with concentration and will, on the other hand, the more influence it will have on the astral light, and the more effectively it will shape the thoughts and actions of other beings. One core aspect of the training of the magician, therefore, centers on learning how to use the imagination and will to define an intention clearly and project it out into the astral light with as much force as possible. Another consists of learning how not to be influenced by the intentions and imaginations of other beings in order to have the freedom to act independently. There is, however, a further dimension of magical training. Under certain conditions, after appropriate training and study, the aspiring magician can enter into a deeper and more fully conscious relation with the astral light, which allows that medium and its influences to be directed at will. The process that leads to this attainment, according to Levi, is called the Great Work. It is the supreme secret of magic, and Levi describes it in a galaxy of ways without ever stating in so many words the secret that underlies it. This reticence is not mere obscurantism. The secret of the Great Work, as Levi points out repeatedly, is incommunicable. Like falling in love or facing death, it involves a shift in consciousness that cannot be translated meaningfully into words. Thus, it cannot be taught to anyone who is not already capable of learning it independently, and each individual who sets out to master the secret has to treat the long road to adeptship alone. The secret can be expressed in symbols, though, for the benefit of those who are almost able to grasp it, and this Levi does repeatedly in a galaxy of different ways. The Garden of Eden and the ancient Greek myth of the Thebaid are among the symbolic narratives he puts to work for this purpose. The Tetragrammaton, the unspeakable four-lettered name of God in Jewish law, is another. But among the simplest and most profound is a sequence of simple geometrical figures: a circle containing a cross, a six-pointed star formed of two triangles pointed in opposite directions, and a triangle, or even more simply, the numbers 4, 2, and 3. The circle and the number 4 relate to the four magical elements: fire, air, water, and earth. The star and the number 2 relate to the two contending and cooperating forces that Chinese philosophy calls yang and yin. The triangle and the number 3 relates to the resolution of those two forces. Unfold the hidden logic uniting these symbols, and you have grasped the supreme secret of Levi's magic. The mysteries of the great work, and more generally the magical traditions Levi sought to reintroduce to a civilization that had forgotten them, thus involve practice as well as theory. In Levi's own formulation, doctrine is accompanied by ritual. It is entirely possible to approach the book that follows as a guide to an unfamiliar way of understanding the world, with no intention of putting that way into practice, and Levi clearly had that possibility in mind. No small number of writers who came after him followed him along that line of approach. It is anything but an accident that H.P. Blavatsky's Isis Unveiled and Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, two of the most influential works of the late 19th century occult revival, not only cite Levi's writings, but take his ideas about the nature of faith, the meaning of symbolism, and the psychological nature of ritual as basic presuppositions. It is equally clear from the contents of Levi's book, though, that he also meant it to be used by that minority of readers who were interested in exploring magic, not merely as a theoretical possibility, but also as a practical reality in their own lives. That intention was fulfilled abundantly in the decades that followed the publication of the Doctrine and Ritual of High Magic. The young men of letters who talked of magic, about whom Yeats reminisced, were matched in intensity and cultural impact, if not in number, by men and women who not only talked of magic, but practiced it as well. For a century after Levi's death, the great majority of practicing mages in the Western world drew extensively on his ideas. Read the writings of Dian Fortune, Franz Bardon, Muni Satou, Julius Evola's Urgrub, and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, just to cite some of the more widely known names, and references to Levi and his ideas stand out on every page. The Doctrine and Ritual of High Magic is thus also a magical handbook, one that lays out a specific and entirely workable course of training that can be followed by the aspiring mage. A word of caution is in order, however, for those who choose to take up the challenge Levi offers. Until quite recently, it was standard for authors of magical treatises to go out of their way not to make things too easy for their readers, and Levi stands squarely in that tradition. His goal throughout the Doctrine and Ritual of High Magic is to force his readers to think for themselves, to look past the obvious surface meanings of his words, to grasp a message that is not meant for the clueless. The tools he put to work in this traditional pastime of mages, though, were those of his own time and culture. Above all, the dry wit and calculated absurdity for which 19th century French literature is deservedly famous. It is thus crucial to keep in mind that Levi very often uses the same symbolic and allegorical way of speaking he traces out in the Bible, the Thebaid, and so many other sources. It is precisely when he seems to be saying something very straightforward in the most simplistic of literal senses that his real meaning is most likely to be concealed. Nor is there only one valid meaning to every phrase or passage. As Levi himself points out, many magical teachings are meant to be taken in three different senses: physical, intellectual, and spiritual. And commonly the student discovers those meanings one at a time, as work pursued on the basis of one meaning develops the inner capacities needed to understand another meaning. Those who are interested in practicing Levi's magic and in following the way of initiation this book outlines are thus advised to read the book carefully, a sentence at a time, to think about ambiguities and potential double meanings, and to reread it frequently. A piece of advice found in the literature of medieval alchemy is worth following. Lege, 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 relege, ora, labora et invenis. Read, 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 read again, pray, labor, that you may discover. The doctrine and ritual of high magic, in other words, was not written for the clueless, or for those who expect the wisdom of the ages to be handed to them without effort. It reserves its gifts for those readers who are willing to grapple with its obscurities, delve below its surface meanings, and turn a wary eye on apparent absurdities, ambiguities, and obfuscations. It is what the alchemists of the Renaissance called a lusus serius, a serious game in which the author's playfulness frames themes of profound importance.